Black pregnant CEO accused of stealing in her own hotel. 5 minutes later, what happened next shocked everyone. "Ma'am, step away from the jewelry case and put your hands where I can see them." The security guard's voice boomed through the luxury lobby of the Chicago Grandview Hotel, and every head turned to stare at Victoria James. 7 months pregnant, impeccably dressed, and the actual owner of the $200 million establishment she was now being accused of robbing. Before we get deep into the story, please let me know in the comment where you're watching from. Hit subscribe if you're hooked in and ready to enjoy the story, because tomorrow I have another beautiful story to share with you and I don't want you to miss it for anything. The October rain drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Grandview Hotel's penthouse office overlooking Michigan Avenue, but Victoria James barely noticed. At 32, she was too busy reviewing quarterly reports that would make most CEOs weep with joy. The luxury hotel chain she'd built from a single property in Detroit had just posted record profits, making her one of the youngest black female billionaires in America. But success in Chicago's cutthroat hospitality industry hadn't come easy. Every board meeting was a battle to prove she belonged. Every business deal required twice the preparation because she couldn't afford a single mistake. Every day, she carried the weight of representing not just her company, but every black woman who dared to dream beyond society's limitations. Victoria placed a protective hand on her growing belly, feeling the baby kick against her palm. 7 months pregnant and still working 16-hour days because she'd learned early that taking time off was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not when vultures circled constantly, waiting for any sign of weakness to question her competence. "Mrs. James, your 3 p.m. is here," announced her assistant through the intercom. The interior designer for the Miami property. Victoria straightened her tailored Armani suit and checked her reflection in the window. Even pregnant, she commanded respect with her presence. 6 feet tall in heels, natural hair styled in an elegant updo, and the kind of confidence that came from clawing your way to the top through sheer determination. The meeting with the designer had gone well. Too well, actually. Victoria had learned to be suspicious of things that seemed easy. In her world, being a black woman meant every victory was temporary, every success questioned, every mistake magnified. As she prepared to leave for the day, Victoria decided to make an unscheduled stop at the hotel's jewelry boutique. The Grandview's ground floor housed several luxury shops, including Meridian Jewelers, where she was considering purchasing a push present for herself, a diamond necklace she'd been admiring for months. What she didn't expect was to find herself at the center of the most humiliating moment of her professional life. Meanwhile, 3 floors below in the hotel's marble-appointed lobby, Dr. Alexander Rhodes sat in one of the plush leather chairs, waiting for his brother to finish checking in. As a trauma surgeon at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, Alexander had seen every kind of human crisis, but he'd never witnessed the kind of systematic racism that was about to unfold before his eyes. At 35, Alexander had spent most of his life insulated by privilege. Private schools, Ivy League education, a successful medical practice. His world was sterile operating rooms and country club dinners, places where his brown skin was notable but not threatening, where his Yale medical degree opened doors that remained locked for others. He was scrolling through patient files on his tablet when the commotion started near the jewelry store. At first, it was just raised voices, nothing unusual in a busy hotel lobby. But something about the tone, the edge of aggression, made him look up. That's when he saw her. The woman was stunning, tall, elegantly dressed, visibly pregnant, and carrying herself with the kind of poise that suggested she belonged in places like this. But the hotel security guard was treating her like a common criminal, his hand hovering near his radio as if she posed some kind of threat. Alexander's medical training had taught him to assess situations quickly, and everything about this scene was wrong. The woman's expensive clothing, her calm demeanor, the way other hotel guests were staring with that particular mixture of curiosity and judgment that he recognized too well. He'd been on the receiving end of that look before, though never to this degree. The suspicious glances when he walked through upscale neighborhoods, the surprised reactions when people learned he was a doctor, the constant need to prove he belonged in spaces that welcomed his expertise but questioned his presence. But this was different. This was public, humiliating, and wrong on every level he could imagine. Alexander stood up, his instincts as both a doctor and a decent human being overriding his natural tendency to avoid confrontation. He didn't know who this woman was, but he knew injustice when he saw it. Have you ever witnessed someone being treated unfairly because of their race? What did you do? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And he was about to discover that sometimes the most important moments of your life happen when you choose to speak up for a stranger. The Meridian Jewelers Boutique occupied a prime corner of the Grandview Hotel's marble lobby, its gleaming display cases filled with diamonds that caught the afternoon light streaming through Chicago's towering windows. Victoria James approached the counter with the measured confidence of someone accustomed to luxury, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. "Good afternoon," she said to the young blonde saleswoman behind the counter. "I'd like to see the diamond tennis necklace in the center display case, please." The saleswoman, her name tag read Ashley, looked up with the kind of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Victoria had seen that look 1,000 times. Polite on the surface, but calculating underneath. The mental math of whether this black woman could actually afford what she was asking to see. "That particular piece is quite expensive," Ashley said carefully, not making any move toward the display case. "Perhaps I could show you something from our more affordable collection?" Victoria's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. After 18 years of building her business empire, she still had to prove her worth in jewelry stores. "The tennis necklace, please," she repeated, her voice carrying just enough ice to remind Ashley who was in charge. Reluctantly, Ashley retrieved the necklace, a stunning cascade of perfectly matched diamonds worth more than most people's annual salaries. Victoria examined it with the practiced eye of someone who understood both quality and value, turning it gently in the light. "It's beautiful," she said, genuinely admiring the craftsmanship. "I'll take it." Ashley's eyebrows shot up. "I'm sorry, did you say?" "I'll take it." Victoria reached into her Hermes bag for her credit card. "Would you like me to pay in full now, or would you prefer to set up financing?" The question was rhetorical. Victoria James didn't finance anything. She paid cash for Bentleys and wrote checks for million-dollar real estate deals. But she wanted to see how far Ashley's prejudice would take her. Let me get my manager," Ashley stammered, clearly out of her depth. While they waited, Victoria continued examining the necklace, imagining how it would look against her skin, how it would remind her of this moment when she'd chosen to treat herself with kindness instead of self-denial. The baby kicked, as if approving of her mother's decision to celebrate their journey together. That's when everything went wrong. "Excuse me, ma'am." The voice belonged to Robert Sterling, the hotel's head of security, a man whose bulk filled out his uniform like a barely contained threat. "I'm going to need you to step away from the display case." Victoria looked up, confusion replacing her earlier annoyance. "I'm sorry." "Step away from the jewelry and put your hands where I can see them," Sterling commanded, his voice loud enough to carry across the lobby. "We've had reports of theft." The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. Around her, the lobby fell silent as guests and staff turned to stare. Cell phones appeared, cameras pointed in her direction, capturing what was about to become the most humiliating moment of her professional life. Theft. Victoria's voice remained steady, but her heart was racing. "I'm purchasing a necklace. Here's my credit card." Sterling ignored the platinum American Express card in her hand. "Ma'am, I need you to place the jewelry on the counter and step back. Hotel security cameras showed you concealing items." Concealing. Victoria's voice caught as the full weight of what was happening crashed over her. She was being accused of shoplifting. In her own hotel. While 7 months pregnant. In front of dozens of witnesses who were now recording her humiliation for social media. "I am not concealing anything," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to commanding boardrooms. "I am Victoria James, and I own this hotel." Sterling's laugh was cruel and dismissive. "Sure you do, lady. And I'm the mayor of Chicago. Now put the jewelry down before I call the real police." From across the lobby, Dr. Alexander Rhodes watched the scene unfold with growing horror. He'd seen prejudice before, but never this blatant, this cruel. The pregnant woman stood with impossible dignity as the security guard humiliated her, her head held high even as her hands trembled slightly. Something about her bearing, her calm in the face of injustice, stirred something deep in Alexander's chest. This wasn't just wrong, it was heartbreaking. "Sir," Alexander called out, stepping forward despite every instinct telling him to stay out of it. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." Sterling whirled around. "This is hotel business, sir. Please return to your seat." "The lady said she owns the hotel," Alexander continued, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to life-and-death decisions. "Perhaps you should verify that before you continue." "She's a shoplifter," Ashley interjected from behind the counter. "Look at her. Does she look like she owns anything?" The words hung in the air like poison. Victoria's breath caught, her hand instinctively moving to protect her unborn child. In 18 years of business, she'd faced skepticism, condescension, and subtle racism. But never anything this overt, this publicly vicious. "What I look like," Victoria said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill, "is a successful businesswoman making a purchase in her own establishment. What you look like is someone about to lose her job." But Sterling was already reaching for his radio. "This is security to management. I need backup in the lobby. Suspected shoplifting in progress. Suspect becoming belligerent." Victoria closed her eyes for just a moment, feeling the baby kick as if sensing her distress. When she opened them, she saw something that surprised her. The strange man who'd tried to defend her was still there, his dark eyes filled with an anger that matched her own. For just a second, in the middle of the worst moment of her professional life, Victoria James didn't feel completely alone. And that, she would later realize, was when everything began to change. The silence in the hotel lobby felt like a living thing, thick and suffocating as every eye remained fixed on Victoria James. The accusation hung in the air like poison gas, and she could feel the weight of judgment pressing down on her from every direction. Guests whispered behind manicured hands, their phones already recording what they assumed was a criminal being caught in the act. Victoria's first instinct was to scream, to rage against the injustice of it all, to demand they call the hotel manager and end this nightmare immediately. But she'd learned long ago that an angry black woman was a dangerous thing to be, especially in public, especially when pregnant, especially when white people were already looking for reasons to justify their assumptions. Instead, she did what she'd been trained to do since childhood. She made herself smaller, quieter, more palatable to their comfort. "There's been a misunderstanding," Victoria said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I'm Victoria James. I own this hotel. The security guard, Johnson, according to his name tag, actually laughed. A short, cruel sound that made several onlookers shift uncomfortably. Right. And I'm the Pope. Ma'am, you need to come with me now, or this is going to get a lot worse for you. Check your employee records, Victoria said, pulling out her phone with deliberate calm. Call the general manager. Look at the ownership documents. I can prove. Put the phone down. Johnson's voice cracked like a whip, and Victoria froze, remembering every story she'd ever heard about black people reaching for something and being shot. Her baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if sensing her fear. Dr. Alexander Rhodes stepped forward, his medical bag clutched in one hand like a shield. Officer, this woman is clearly pregnant and in distress. Perhaps we should. Sir, step back. This doesn't concern you. It concerns anyone with eyes, Alexander said, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed in life-or-death situations. I'm Dr. Rhodes from Northwestern Memorial. This woman needs to sit down, not be harassed. Victoria looked at this stranger, this man who didn't know her but was willing to put himself between her and humiliation, and felt something crack open in her chest. In her world of calculated alliances and strategic friendships, genuine kindness was rarer than diamonds. I don't need medical attention, she said quietly. I need them to verify who I am. Which we'll do down at the station, Johnson said, moving closer with his hand still hovering near his handcuffs. After you're processed. The word processed hit Victoria like a physical blow. Processed. Like meat. Like a criminal. Like everything she'd worked her entire life to rise above. Around them, the crowd was growing. Hotel guests pressed closer, their expensive phones capturing every second of her degradation. Victoria could already see the headlines. Pregnant black woman caught stealing. Hotel thief claims to own property. Entitled criminal plays race card. None of them would mention that she'd graduated summa cum laude from Wharton. None would talk about the 12-hour days she'd worked building her empire, or the discrimination she'd faced at every turn. They would see what they wanted to see, a black woman who didn't know her place. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to turn around and put your hands behind your back, Johnson said, producing handcuffs that glinted under the lobby's crystal chandeliers. No. The word came out stronger than Victoria had intended, surprising even herself. I will not be handcuffed in my own hotel for the crime of existing while black and pregnant. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some guests nodded in approval at her backbone. Others looked scandalized that she would play the race card so blatantly. Ma'am, you're resisting. She's asserting her rights, Alexander interrupted, stepping closer to Victoria, which include the right to have her identity verified before being arrested for a crime no one actually saw her commit. Johnson's face flushed red. Sir, if you don't step back, I'll have you arrested for interfering with a police investigation. You're hotel security, not police, Alexander pointed out calmly. And last I checked, shopping while black wasn't a crime in Illinois. Victoria stared at this man who was willing to risk arrest for a stranger. In her experience, most people, even well-meaning ones, preferred to stay out of situations that might make them uncomfortable. But Dr. Rhodes was standing beside her like a shield, his presence both surprising and deeply moving. Look, Victoria said, trying one more time to reach whatever humanity might exist in Johnson's chest. My driver's license has this address as my primary residence. My business cards identify me as the CEO. My key card opens every door in this building. Just let me show you. Criminals have fake IDs all the time, Johnson said dismissively. and anyone can print business cards. The injustice of it hit Victoria like a tsunami. She could produce a birth certificate, a passport, a dozen forms of identification, and it wouldn't matter. In Johnson's eyes, and in the eyes of too many people watching, she would always be guilty until proven innocent, and maybe not even then. "This is insane," Alexander said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "You're about to arrest the owner of this hotel based on nothing but racial profiling." "I'm doing my job," Johnson snapped back. "And my job is protecting the property and guests of this establishment from theft." "From theft that no one witnessed," Alexander pressed. "From a woman whose only crime seems to be shopping while black." Victoria felt tears threaten and forced them back. She would not cry in front of these people. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. But inside she was screaming. At the injustice, at the humiliation, at the fact that 32 years of success could be wiped away by one man's prejudice. The hotel's general manager finally appeared, pushing through the crowd with the harried expression of someone whose day had just become infinitely more complicated. Victoria had never been so relieved to see Gerald Morrison's familiar face. "What's going on here?" Morrison asked, his eyes taking in the scene. The security guard, the handcuffs, the pregnant woman at the center of it all. His face went pale as recognition dawned. "Gerald," Victoria said simply, "please tell them who I am." "How do you think you would react if you witnessed this kind of injustice happening to someone? Would you speak up or stay silent? Share your thoughts below." Morrison's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. In that moment of hesitation, Victoria saw her future flash before her eyes. Not just this humiliation, but every boardroom where her competence would be questioned, every business deal where someone would remember the pregnant thief from the Chicago Grandview. Everything she'd built was about to crumble because one man couldn't imagine that a black woman might own the ground he stood on. The executive conference room on the 42nd floor of the Grandview Hotel had never felt smaller. Victoria sat at the head of her own boardroom table, her hands folded protectively over her belly, while Chicago Police Detective Maria Santos reviewed security footage on her laptop. Alexander sat across from her, his presence both comforting and unsettling in ways she couldn't quite name. "Mrs. James, I need you to understand that we're taking this very seriously," Detective Santos said, her voice professional but tinged with what Victoria hoped was genuine remorse. "The preliminary review shows that Officer Martinez acted without proper cause, and we're launching a full investigation." Victoria nodded, her throat still raw from the crying she'd done in Alexander's arms 20 minutes earlier. The humiliation burned fresh every time she thought about it. The stares, the whispers, the absolute certainty in that security guard's voice when he'd accused her of theft. "The hotel's insurance company insists on a complete incident report," continued Victoria's lawyer, James Mitchell, who'd arrived within minutes of her call. "They're concerned about liability, especially given the circumstances." "The circumstances," Victoria repeated quietly, "being that I was accused of stealing in my own hotel because I'm black." The room fell silent except for the distant hum of Chicago traffic 42 floors below. Alexander watched Victoria's face, seeing the way she held herself together through sheer force of will, and felt something shift inside his chest. He'd known her for less than 2 hours, but he'd already seen more strength and grace than he'd witnessed in most people's entire lifetimes. "I need to ask," Detective Santos said carefully, "do you want to press charges against Officer Martinez for false detention and discrimination?" Victoria was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the edge of the conference table she'd sat at hundreds of times before. This room had been her sanctuary, the place where she'd made decisions that affected thousands of employees and millions in revenue. Now it felt tainted by what had happened downstairs. "I need time to think about it," she said finally. "Right now, I just want to understand how this happened. How a security guard in my own hotel didn't know who I was." James cleared his throat. "Victoria, we should discuss the PR implications. This kind of story, it could be devastating for the hotel chain if it gets out. Or it could be powerful," Alexander said quietly, speaking for the first time since they'd sat down. Everyone turned to look at him, and he felt heat rise in his cheeks. "I'm sorry, I don't mean to overstep. I'm not part of your business. I saw what happened down there, and it was wrong. And maybe people need to see that these things still happen, even to successful, accomplished women like Mrs. James." Victoria studied his face, seeing something in his eyes that she rarely encountered in her professional world. Genuine moral outrage on her behalf, not calculated concern about stock prices or liability. "Dr. Rhodes is right," she said slowly. "But James, you're right too. This could destroy everything I've built." She pressed both hands to her belly as the baby kicked, as if responding to her stress. "I have more than myself to think about now." Detective Santos closed her laptop. "You don't have to decide today about pressing charges. But I want you to know that Officer Martinez has been suspended pending investigation, and we're reviewing all his previous incidents." "Previous incidents?" Alexander asked sharply. "Let's just say this isn't the first complaint we've received about his judgment when it comes to people of color." The words hung in the air like a poison cloud. Victoria felt sick, imagining how many other people had been humiliated, terrorized, violated by the same man who'd grabbed her arm and threatened to have her arrested. "I want to see the security footage," Victoria said suddenly. "All of it. From the moment I walked into that jewelry store until the moment Dr. Rhodes intervened." "Victoria, I don't think that's wise," James warned. "Seeing it again might be traumatic." "I'm already traumatized," she interrupted, her voice stronger than she felt. "I need to see exactly what happened. I need to understand." Detective Santos hesitated. "Are you sure? It's difficult to watch." "I'm sure." Alexander leaned forward. "Would you like me to stay? Or would you prefer privacy?" Victoria met his eyes, seeing the same steadiness that had anchored her during the worst moments downstairs. "Stay. Please." Detective Santos reopened her laptop and queued up the footage. The black and white security camera showed the jewelry store from multiple angles. Timestamp reading 4:47 p.m. Victoria watched herself enter the boutique, speaking briefly with the sales associate, moving to examine a display case of necklaces. "There," she said, pointing at the screen. "That's when I was looking at the Cartier necklace. The one I've been considering buying for months." On screen, Victoria could be seen talking with the sales associate, who was nodding and smiling. The interaction looked completely normal, professional, friendly. "And there's Officer Martinez," Detective Santos said as a figure in a security uniform entered the frame. "Watch his body language. He comes in already aggressive, already suspicious." Alexander watched the screen with growing anger. Even in grainy black and white, Martinez's prejudice was obvious. He approached Victoria like she was a threat, not a customer. His hand was already moving toward his radio before any alleged crime had even been reported. The sales associate, Jennifer Walsh, later told us that she never called security, Detective Santos continued. "She said Martinez just appeared and started making accusations. She tried to explain that you were a valued customer, but he wouldn't listen. On screen, Victoria watched her own humiliation unfold. She saw herself try to maintain dignity while Martinez grabbed her arm, saw herself reach for her ID while he shouted orders, saw the moment when other customers started pulling out their phones to record. And then she saw Alexander enter the frame. Even in security footage, his moral clarity was unmistakable. He didn't hesitate, didn't calculate risks or consequences. He saw injustice and stepped directly into it. "You could have been hurt," Victoria said quietly, not taking her eyes off the screen. "He was aggressive, volatile. You could have been arrested too." "I couldn't just watch," Alexander said simply. "I'm a doctor. I took an oath to do no harm, but that also means I can't stand by while harm is being done to others." Victoria felt tears threatening again, but for different reasons this time. When was the last time someone had risked something for her without expecting anything in return? When was the last time a man had seen her as a human being first, a business opportunity second? The footage continued, showing Alexander's calm but firm intervention, the arrival of hotel management, the gradual understanding that a terrible mistake had been made. Victoria watched herself break down in Alexander's arms and felt a complicated mixture of shame and gratitude. "Mrs. James," Detective Santos said gently, "I need to ask about your plans for the next few days. Will you be staying in Chicago? The investigation will move quickly, but we may need additional statements." Victoria looked around the conference room, at the city skyline beyond the windows, at the faces of people whose jobs depended on her decisions. "I'm not going anywhere. This is my hotel, my city, my business. I won't be driven away by one man's prejudice." But even as she said the words, Victoria felt the weight of what lay ahead. The investigation, the media attention, the inevitable questions about her competence and character. She was 7 months pregnant, exhausted, and facing a crisis that could destroy her reputation. Alexander seemed to sense her thoughts. "What can I do to help?" he asked. "I know I'm a stranger, but I was a witness. If you need testimony, character references, anything." "Why?" Victoria asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. "Why do you care? You don't know me. This isn't your fight." Alexander was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "Because 30 minutes ago, I watched a pregnant woman be humiliated and terrorized for no reason except the color of her skin. Because I'm a black man who's been lucky enough to avoid the worst of what you experienced today, and that luck comes with responsibility. And because—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Because in the space of 2 hours, you've shown more courage and grace than I've seen in a lifetime. You deserve better than what happened today." The room fell silent except for the steady rhythm of rain against the windows. Victoria felt something shift inside her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with pregnancy hormones and everything to do with recognition. Here was a man who saw her not as a business asset or a diversity statistic, but as a human being worthy of respect and protection. For the first time since the incident, Victoria felt like she might not have to face what was coming alone. The silence in Victoria's penthouse office was deafening as she stared at the security footage frozen on her laptop screen. Alexander sat across from her desk, his presence both comforting and surreal. 2 hours had passed since the lobby incident, and she was still processing the fact that this stranger, this beautiful, brilliant surgeon, had stepped into her nightmare without hesitation. "I need to show you something," Victoria said quietly, her fingers trembling as she navigated to a folder marked "Personal, Confidential." The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if sensing her emotional turmoil. Alexander leaned forward, his dark eyes gentle but alert. In the soft lighting of her office, with Chicago's skyline twinkling beyond the windows, he looked less like the fierce protector who had demolished hotel security and more like someone she could trust with the truth she'd never told anyone. "This isn't the first time," she whispered, clicking open a video file dated 3 years earlier. The screen filled with footage from the Grandview sister property in Atlanta. A younger Victoria, not yet pregnant, being escorted from her own hotel by police while guests watched in horror. Alexander's jaw clenched as he watched. What happened? A guest reported that a black woman was acting suspicious near the executive elevators. "I was coming back from a site inspection, still in my hard hat and work clothes." Victoria's voice was steady, but her hand shook. "The manager didn't recognize me. Security didn't recognize me. My own employees treated me like a threat." The video showed Victoria maintaining her composure even as officers questioned her right to be in the building, even as her own staff looked on in embarrassment and confusion. Only when her assistant arrived with identification and corporate documentation was she released, but not before every guest in the lobby had witnessed her humiliation. That's when I realized that no matter how successful I became, no matter how many hotels I owned or how many billions I was worth, there would always be people who saw my skin color before they saw my humanity. She closed the laptop with deliberate care. "So I started carrying proof everywhere. Business cards, corporate ID, legal documents, like a passport to my own life." Alexander reached across the desk, his fingers brushing hers. "Victoria, I had no idea." "How could you?" she interrupted, but not unkindly. "You walk through the world as a successful black man, which comes with its own challenges, but you're still a man. You're still a doctor. Society sees you as someone who belongs in the spaces you occupy. But a black woman? A pregnant black woman? We're automatic suspects." She stood and walked to the window, her hand pressed to her lower back where the baby's weight had been causing her pain all week. "Do you want to know the real reason I work 16-hour days? It's not ambition, it's insurance. The higher I climb, the harder it becomes for people to dismiss me. But apparently not hard enough." Alexander joined her at the window, and she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "What about your family? Your support system?" Victoria's laugh was bitter. "My parents died in a car accident when I was 15. I was raised by my grandmother in Detroit until she passed during my sophomore year at Harvard Business School. No siblings, no husband, no safety net. Just me building an empire one hotel at a time because I learned early that the only person I could count on was myself. And the baby's father?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Victoria touched her belly again, feeling the familiar surge of protective love mixed with deep sadness. "Trevor was a venture capitalist. Brilliant, charming, black like me. We dated for 2 years, and I thought I'd finally found someone who understood the pressure, the constant need to prove ourselves." She turned away from the window, unable to meet Alexander's eyes. "When I told him about the pregnancy, he said he wasn't ready to be a father. But what he really meant was that he wasn't ready to be tied to a woman who attracted the kind of attention I do. His exact words were, 'I can't have my reputation damaged by being associated with your controversies.'" Alexander's intake of breath was sharp. "Your controversies? You mean the racism you face?" Apparently, my commitment to calling out discrimination was bad for his business. He suggested I keep quiet, smile more, don't rock the boat. When I refused, he left. Victoria's voice cracked slightly. 3 months ago, I found out through Forbes that he's engaged to a white colleague. Someone who won't cause him any complications." The pain in her voice was raw, and Alexander found himself fighting the urge to find Trevor and teach him what real consequences looked like. Instead, he stepped closer, close enough that Victoria could smell his cologne, could see the genuine fury and compassion warring in his expression. "He's an idiot," Alexander said simply. "And a coward. Maybe. But he was also the last person I trusted with my heart." Victoria looked up at him, and for the first time since the lobby incident, her carefully maintained composure cracked. "Do you know what it's like to love someone and then discover they're ashamed of who you are? To realize that your strength, your refusal to be diminished, makes you unlovable." Alexander's hands found her face, his thumbs brushing away tears she didn't realize she was crying. "Victoria, listen to me. Your strength doesn't make you unlovable. It makes you extraordinary. Any man who can't see that doesn't deserve you." "You don't know me," she whispered, but she didn't pull away from his touch. "I know enough. I know you built a billion-dollar empire from nothing. I know you faced down a room full of people today with more grace than I've ever seen. I know you're carrying a child and working impossible hours because you refuse to let anyone question your capability. I know you're the kind of woman who inspires strangers to be better versions of themselves." The baby kicked again, hard enough to make Victoria gasp. Alexander's eyes dropped to her belly, and without thinking he placed his hand next to hers. "Strong like Mama," he said softly, and Victoria felt something inside her chest crack open. Not breaking but blooming. "Why did you help me today?" she asked. "You didn't know who I was. You risked your own reputation, your own comfort. Why?" Alexander was quiet for a long moment, his hands still resting on her belly where their child. No, her child, she corrected herself, continued to move restlessly. "Because I've been that person," he finally said. "Not to that degree, not with that level of public humiliation, but I've been the black man who doesn't belong, who must be up to something suspicious. And every time it happened, I told myself it wasn't that bad, that I was overreacting, that making waves would only make things worse." He looked directly into her eyes, and Victoria saw something there that she'd never seen before. A man who truly understood. "Today, watching you maintain your dignity while they tried to strip it away, I realized that silence isn't protection. It's complicated. And I couldn't be complicit anymore." Victoria felt the tears coming again, but this time they weren't from pain. For the first time in months, maybe years, she didn't feel alone. "Alexander." "Yes. Thank you. Not just for today, but for seeing me. Really seeing me." He smiled, and it transformed his entire face. "Thank you for letting me." Outside the window, Chicago glittered in the darkness, and for the first time since she'd built her empire, Victoria James felt like she might have found someone worth sharing it with. The private dining room at Alinea, Chicago's most exclusive restaurant, felt like a sanctuary away from the chaos of the past week. Victoria sat across from Alexander at the intimate table for two, the soft candlelight casting a warm glow over her face as she finally allowed herself to relax for the first time since the incident. "I still can't believe you got us a reservation here on such short notice," Victoria said, taking a sip of her sparkling water while admiring the artistic presentation of their first course. Alexander smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners in that way that made her heart skip. Being a trauma surgeon has its perks. The head chef's daughter needed emergency surgery last year. He's been trying to repay the favor ever since. "And you chose to use it on me?" Victoria's voice was soft, vulnerable in a way she rarely allowed herself to be. "Victoria," Alexander leaned forward, his voice serious but tender. "There's nowhere else I'd rather be right now. No one else I'd rather be with." The past week has been a whirlwind. The viral video had triggered a federal investigation into the hotel's practices. 3 major corporations had pulled their events in solidarity with Victoria, and the media coverage had been relentless. Through it all, Alexander had been her constant, fielding calls from reporters, accompanying her to meetings with lawyers, and somehow managing to make her laugh even on the darkest days. "You know," Victoria said, cutting into the perfectly prepared salmon, "before last week I thought I had to handle everything alone. I've been doing it for so long, I forgot what it felt like to have someone in my corner." "You were never alone," Alexander replied, his hand reaching across the table to cover hers. "You just haven't found your team yet. And, Victoria, you've got an army behind you now." The investigation had revealed systematic discrimination not just at the Grandview, but at several other luxury establishments in Chicago. Victoria's humiliation had become a catalyst for change that was rippling across the hospitality industry nationwide. "The baby's been kicking like crazy today," Victoria laughed, placing Alexander's hand on her belly. "I think all the excitement has her stirred up." Alexander's eyes widened as he felt the strong movement beneath his palm. "She's going to be a fighter, just like her mother." "You really think it's a girl?" Victoria asked, loving how natural it felt to share these intimate moments with him. "I know it's a girl," Alexander said with confidence. "She's already got your strength. I can feel it." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, his hand still resting on her belly, both of them marveling at the life growing inside her. It should have felt strange. This man she'd known for barely a week already felt more like family than people she'd known for years. "Alexander," Victoria's voice was barely above a whisper. "What are we doing? A week ago we were strangers. Now you're here, feeling my baby kick, and it feels right," he finished, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her hand. "Terrifying," she admitted with a shaky laugh. "I don't do this. I don't let people in this fast. I don't trust this easily." "Neither do I," Alexander confessed. "I've spent my whole career being methodical, careful, analytical. But with you, all of that goes out the window. You make me want to take risks I never thought I'd take." Victoria studied his face in the candlelight, seeing not just the successful surgeon but the man underneath. Kind, genuine, unafraid of her strength or her vulnerability. "My ex," Victoria said quietly. "Marcus, he left the moment I told him about the pregnancy. Said he wasn't ready to be tied down to someone who came with complications. That's what he called my success. Complications." Alexander's jaw tightened with anger, but his voice remained gentle. "He was a fool. Your success isn't a complication, Victoria. It's one of the most beautiful things about you. You built an empire from nothing. You employ thousands of people. You've broken barriers that will make it easier for the women who come after you." "Is that how you see me?" Victoria asked, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I see a woman who stands up for what's right, even when the world is trying to tear her down. I see someone who's carrying a child while running a corporation and still finds time to make sure her employees get better benefits. I see." He paused, his voice catching slightly. "I see the woman I'm falling in love with." The words hung in the air between them, honest and raw and terrifying in their implications. "Alexander," Victoria whispered, her heart racing. "You don't have to say anything," he said quickly. "I know it's too soon. I know you're dealing with so much right now. I know." "I'm falling in love with you too," Victoria interrupted, her voice strong and certain. And you're right, it's terrifying. But it's also the most real thing I've felt in years. Alexander brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her palm. We'll figure it out together. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. Together, Victoria repeated, the word feeling like a promise. Do you believe in love that happens quickly? Or do you think it takes time to really know someone? Share your thoughts on instant connections in the comments. As they finished their meal, talking and laughing like old friends, Victoria felt something she'd never experienced before: complete acceptance. Alexander didn't see her pregnancy as baggage or her success as intimidating. He saw her as she was, strong and vulnerable, powerful and human, worthy of love exactly as she was. There's something I want to show you, Alexander said as they prepared to leave. He pulled out his phone and showed her a news article. Look at this. The headline read, Grandview Hotel announces new diversity and inclusion program following discrimination incident. The article detailed how Victoria's experience had prompted the hotel chain to partner with civil rights organizations to completely overhaul their training and hiring practices. You did this, Alexander said, his voice full of pride. Your courage, your refusal to stay silent. You've changed everything. Victoria felt tears prick her eyes as she read about the scholarships being established for hospitality students from underrepresented communities, the new partnerships with minority-owned businesses, the mandatory bias training for all employees. We did this, she corrected, looking into his eyes. I couldn't have survived this week without you. As they walked out of the restaurant into the cool Chicago night, Alexander's arm around her shoulders, Victoria realized that sometimes the worst moments of your life could lead to the best ones. A week ago, she'd been humiliated and alone. Tonight, she was loved, supported, and surrounded by possibility. The baby kicked again, as if approving of the man who was quickly becoming a father figure. Victoria smiled, placing both their hands on her belly, and for the first time in her adult life, she wasn't afraid to hope for a future built on love instead of just ambition. Come on, Alexander said, hailing a cab. Let's get you and our daughter home. Our daughter. The words sent warmth flooding through Victoria's chest. She was no longer facing motherhood alone. She was no longer facing anything alone. 2 weeks after the Grandview incident that had made Victoria a national symbol of grace under fire, everything was falling apart. Victoria sat in her penthouse office at 2 a.m., staring at the resignation letter on her computer screen that she couldn't bring herself to send. The city lights of Chicago blurred through her tears, the first she'd allowed herself to shed since that horrible day in the lobby. The media storm had been relentless. While many praised her dignity and strength, the trolls and racists had crawled out of their holes with unprecedented viciousness. Death threats arrived daily. Protesters gathered outside her hotels. Her stock price had plummeted 40% as nervous investors worried about the controversy surrounding her brand. But the final blow had come that afternoon during the emergency board meeting. Victoria, we think it's best if you step back temporarily, board member Harrison Blackwell had announced with the cold efficiency of a man who'd never faced a day of discrimination in his privileged life. Just until this all blows over. We've brought in interim management. Interim management. The euphemism for we're stealing your company while you're down. This is my company, Victoria had said quietly, her hand instinctively protecting her 8-month belly. I built this from nothing. And you'll get it back, Blackwell had replied with the kind of smile that promised nothing. We just need to restore confidence in the brand. You understand. She understood perfectly. The moment she'd shown vulnerability, the moment she'd been victimized, She'd become a liability. The same board that had celebrated her success was now using her trauma as an excuse to push her aside. The worst part wasn't the betrayal, though that cut deep. The worst part was the growing certainty that she'd been naive to think she could ever truly belong in their world. Her phone buzzed with another text from Alexander. "Haven't heard from you in days. Are you okay? Can we talk?" Victoria stared at his message, her heart aching. Over the past 2 weeks, Alexander had been a constant presence. Bringing her meals when she forgot to eat, sitting with her through panic attacks, holding her hand during doctor's appointments. He'd taken leave from the hospital to help her manage the crisis, and somewhere between his fierce advocacy and gentle comfort, she'd fallen completely in love with him. But love felt like another luxury she couldn't afford right now. The truth was, associating with her had already cost him professionally. She'd overheard him on a phone call with his department head, defending his relationship with that hotel woman, and the time he'd been spending away from the hospital. His career was suffering because of her, and she couldn't stand the thought of dragging him down further. She typed and deleted 17 different responses before finally writing, "I'm fine. You should focus on your work. Thank you for everything." It was a lie. She wasn't fine. She was drowning, and the one person who made her feel like she could breathe was someone she had to let go before she destroyed his life too. 3 floors below, Alexander sat in the hotel bar that had become their unofficial meeting place, staring at Victoria's text message and feeling like he'd been punched in the chest. "I'm fine. You should focus on your work." He knew Victoria well enough by now to recognize a dismissal wrapped in politeness. She was shutting him out, just when she needed support the most. The woman who had faced down racist security guards and hostile board members with unwavering strength was finally cracking, and she was doing it alone. Alexander signaled the bartender for another scotch, even though alcohol wouldn't numb the ache in his chest. For 2 weeks, he'd watched the most remarkable woman he'd ever met endure attack after attack with a grace that humbled him. He'd fallen in love with her resilience, her intelligence, her fierce protective instincts toward her unborn child. But more than that, he'd fallen in love with her vulnerability. The moments when she let her guard down and let him see the scared, exhausted woman beneath the CEO armor. The way she worried about her baby's future, the way she sometimes stared out windows as if she were trapped, the way she'd cried in his arms after reading particularly vicious social media comments. Rough night. The bartender, an older black man named Jerome, had become something of a confidant over the past weeks. "The woman I love is pushing me away because she thinks she's protecting me," Alexander said, surprising himself with his honesty. Jerome nodded knowingly. Strong women do that. They carry the world on their shoulders until they forget they don't have to carry it alone. Her board is trying to force her out of her own company. She's 8 months pregnant, dealing with death threats, and now she won't even take my calls. Alexander's voice cracked with frustration and pain. "I don't know how to help someone who won't let me." "Maybe helping isn't about what you can do for her," Jerome said quietly. "Maybe it's about what you're willing to lose for her." Alexander looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "Love ain't about convenience, son. It's about choosing someone every day, even when it costs you something. Especially when it costs you something." Jerome's words hit like a surgical blade, clean and precise. Alexander thought about the conversations with his department head, the raised eyebrows from colleagues, the not-so-subtle suggestions that his involvement in this situation was affecting his professional reputation. He'd been defensive about it, trying to minimize the impact on his career while still supporting Victoria. But what if the defense wasn't enough? What if love required him to make a choice? his comfortable, safe professional world, or the woman who had changed everything about how he saw justice, courage, and what really mattered. His phone buzzed with a news alert. Grandview Hotel CEO Victoria James expected to announce resignation tomorrow. Alexander's blood ran cold. She was giving up. After everything she'd fought for, everything she'd built, she was letting them win. "Jerome, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest." "Shoot." "If I do what I'm thinking about doing, it's going to destroy my career. Probably make me unemployable at every major hospital in the city. Is love worth that?" Jerome studied him for a long moment. "Son, I've been married to the same woman for 43 years. And I can tell you that a career will keep you comfortable, but love, real love, that'll keep you alive. The question isn't whether she's worth it. The question is whether you're brave enough to deserve her." Alexander finished his drink and stood up, his decision crystallizing with painful clarity. He'd spent his whole life playing it safe, staying in his lane, avoiding anything that might jeopardize his position. But Victoria had taught him that some things were more important than safety. Justice was more important than comfort. Love was more important than reputation. And sometimes the most important thing you could do was risk everything for someone who mattered more than your own security. He walked out of the bar with Jerome's words echoing in his mind. Is love worth that? The answer, terrifying and liberating at the same time, was yes. But first, he had to convince Victoria that she was worth fighting for, even if it meant they both lost everything they'd worked to build. Especially then. 3 days had passed since the lawsuit was filed, and Victoria James sat alone in her penthouse office as Chicago's skyline glittered in the darkness beyond her windows. The silence was deafening. No ringing phones, no meetings, no constant hum of business that had defined her life for the past decade. Even her assistant had gone home hours ago, leaving Victoria with nothing but her thoughts and the weight of an impossible decision. On her desk lay 2 documents that would determine not just her future, but the future of every black woman who dared to dream of breaking barriers in corporate America. The first was a settlement offer from Grandview Hotel's insurance company. $50 million, a public apology, and guaranteed policy changes. All she had to do was sign, take the money, and disappear quietly. No trial, no media circus, no prolonged battle that would expose her unborn child to months of public scrutiny. The second was a legal brief from her attorney outlining their trial strategy. A full-scale assault on institutional racism that could change corporate policies nationwide but would also drag her personal life through the mud for months, possibly years. Victoria's hand rested on her swollen belly, feeling the baby kick restlessly as if sensing her mother's turmoil. At 8 months pregnant, she was exhausted, emotionally drained, and terrified of what a prolonged court battle might mean for her health and her child's well-being. But she was also Victoria James, the woman who had built a billion-dollar empire by refusing to accept limitations, who had never backed down from a fight, who had promised herself that she would leave the world better than she found it. Her phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you. But remember, this isn't just about you anymore. It's about every black woman who will walk through a hotel lobby after you." She closed her eyes, remembering the look of humiliation and rage on her own mother's face 30 years ago when she'd been followed through a department store in Detroit, accused of stealing a dress she was actually planning to buy for Victoria's school graduation. Her mother had left without purchasing anything, her dignity shattered, her daughter watching from behind a clothing rack. How many other little girls were watching now? Victoria's laptop chimed with an email notification. Against her better judgment, she opened it, expecting another legal document or media request. Instead, she found something that made her breath catch in her throat. The subject line read, Thank you from a hotel manager in Atlanta. Dear Mrs. James, you don't know me, but I wanted you to know what happened yesterday at our hotel. A young black woman, a guest, was questioned by security about her right to be in our VIP lounge. Instead of escalating the situation, our security chief stopped and said, "Remember the Victoria James case. We're better than this." The guest was treated with respect and dignity. Your courage is already changing things. Sincerely, Robert Chen, General Manager, Four Seasons Atlanta. Victoria stared at the screen, tears streaming down her face. The email was followed by dozens of others. Hotel managers, security directors, hospitality workers across the country, all reporting similar changes in their protocols, their training, their consciousness. Her phone rang, displaying a number she didn't recognize. "Hello, Mrs. James? This is Jennifer Washington. I'm a law student at Howard University, and I just wanted to say thank you." Victoria wiped her eyes. "Thank you for what?" "For fighting. For not taking the easy way out. My mother was a hotel housekeeper for 30 years, and she was treated like she was invisible, like she didn't matter. What you're doing, it matters. We see you and we're with you." The call ended, but Victoria's phone immediately rang again. Then again. Then again. Students, mothers, business owners, hotel workers, all calling to express their support, to share their own stories, to remind her that she wasn't fighting alone. By midnight, Victoria had received over 200 messages. Each one was a reminder that her choice would ripple far beyond her own life, far beyond her own pain. Alexander arrived at 1 a.m., finding her still at her desk, surrounded by printed emails and handwritten notes that had been delivered throughout the day. "You should be sleeping," he said softly, moving to stand behind her chair, his hands gently massaging the tension from her shoulders. "I can't sleep. Not until I decide." She leaned back against him, drawing strength from his presence. "Alexander, what if I lose? What if dragging this out for months just makes everything worse? What if you win and change everything?" Victoria turned to face him, seeing her own fear and determination reflected in his eyes. "The baby will be born to a mother who fought for justice, who showed the world that black women don't back down, don't disappear quietly, don't accept less than they deserve." He knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "Victoria, I've watched you build an empire. I've seen you negotiate deals that lesser people would have walked away from. I've witnessed your strength, your grace, your absolute refusal to be diminished by anyone or anything." His voice grew stronger, more certain. "But more than that, I've fallen in love with a woman who uses her power to lift others up, who sees injustice and fights it, who carries the hopes of an entire generation on her shoulders and doesn't break under the weight." Victoria's heart stopped. In all the chaos, all the legal meetings, all the media attention, they hadn't talked about what was growing between them beyond the crisis that brought them together. "Alexander, I know this isn't the time or place for declarations of love. I know you have bigger things to worry about than my feelings. But I need you to know that whatever you decide tomorrow, you're not alone. Whether we fight this battle together or start over somewhere else, I'm not going anywhere." Victoria stared at him, seeing not just the successful surgeon who had stood up for her, but the man who had held her while she cried, who had fielded angry phone calls from reporters, who had researched pregnancy nutrition to make sure she was taking care of herself during the stress of the lawsuit. "You love me," she whispered. "I love you. I love your strength, your vulnerability, your absolutely terrifying competence. I love the way you fight for people you've never met. I love that you're going to be an incredible mother. I love all of it, Victoria. I love you." For the first time in days, Victoria smiled, really smiled, the kind that reached her eyes and lit up her entire face. "I love you too," she said simply. "And I know what I have to do." She reached for the settlement offer, and Alexander held his breath. Without hesitation, Victoria James tore the $50 million check in half. "We fight," she said firmly. "We fight until every little black girl knows she belongs anywhere she chooses to go. We fight until no woman ever has to choose between her dignity and her livelihood. We fight because love isn't just about protecting each other. It's about protecting the future." Alexander stood, pulling her into his arms, careful of her pregnant belly. Together. Together. Outside the windows of the penthouse office, Chicago slept peacefully, unaware that in a few hours, Victoria James would hold a press conference that would change the landscape of corporate America forever. Unaware that two people who had found love in the midst of injustice were about to take on an entire system. Unaware that sometimes the most important battles are fought not for personal gain, but for the radical idea that everyone, regardless of race, gender, or circumstance, deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. The choice was made. The real fight was about to begin. 2 years later, the same Grandview Hotel lobby that had once witnessed Victoria's public humiliation now sparkled with celebration lights as Chicago's most prominent power couple renewed their wedding vows. Victoria Rhodes, she'd taken Alexander's name with pride, stood radiant in a flowing ivory gown that accommodated her second pregnancy, this one planned and joyful. The transformation of the space was symbolic. Where security guards had once harassed an innocent woman, now stood a beautiful arch of white roses and baby's breath. The jewelry boutique that had been the site of such pain now displayed a custom collection designed by Victoria herself, with proceeds benefiting racial justice organizations across Illinois. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alexander said into the microphone, his voice carrying the same steady confidence that had defended his wife 2 years ago, "we gather today not just to celebrate our love, but to commemorate the moment that changed everything, when justice, dignity, and unexpected love converged in this very lobby." Victoria's eyes filled with happy tears as she looked out at the crowd. The guest list read like a who's who of Chicago's elite, but more importantly, it included the people who had stood by them through the lawsuit, the media storm, and the beautiful chaos of building a life together. Carmen Martinez, the former Meridian Jewelers employee who had first recognized Victoria, now served as the hotel's director of diversity and inclusion, a position Victoria had created specifically for her. She sat in the front row, dabbing her eyes with a tissue as she watched the woman she'd helped vindicate celebrate true happiness. Judge Patricia Williams, who had presided over the lawsuit that resulted in a $15 million settlement and complete overhaul of the hotel's policies, raised her champagne glass in salute. The money had gone directly into the Victoria James Foundation, which provided legal defense funds for victims of racial discrimination. Even more meaningful was the presence of Dr. Jennifer Chen, the trauma counselor who had helped Victoria process the emotional aftermath of her public humiliation. Through therapy, Victoria had learned that her strength didn't require carrying every burden alone, that vulnerability could be a superpower when shared with the right person. 2 years ago, Victoria began, her voice strong and clear as she addressed their guests, "I was accused of stealing in my own hotel. I was humiliated, violated, and made to feel like I didn't belong in the spaces I had built with my own hands." The room fell silent, everyone remembering the viral video that had sparked nationwide conversations about racial profiling and implicit bias. But that moment of injustice led me to the greatest justice of my life. Finding a partner who didn't just witness my pain, but chose to stand in it with me. Alexander didn't have to speak up that day. He could have stayed in his chair, minded his own business, avoided the complications that came with loving a woman who refuses to be silent about inequality. Alexander reached for her hand, their wedding rings catching the light. His original proposal had been spontaneous, born from the intensity of fighting injustice together. This renewal was different, deeper, rooted in the daily choice to love each other through triumph and trial. Instead, Victoria continued, he chose courage. He chose love. He chose to see my humanity when others only saw their prejudices. And in doing so, he changed not just my life, but the lives of countless others who have found their voices through our foundation. Their 18-month-old daughter, Grace, toddled between the chairs in a miniature version of Victoria's dress, her natural curls adorned with tiny flowers. She was the living embodiment of love conquering hate, a child who would grow up knowing that justice was worth fighting for and that dignity was never negotiable. The beautiful irony, Alexander added, his medical training giving way to the poet's heart Victoria had discovered in him, is that the worst day of your life became the best day of mine. Not because I enjoyed watching you suffer, but because witnessing your grace under pressure made me realize I wanted to spend the rest of my life learning how to be half as brave as you are. The crowd erupted in applause, but Victoria only had eyes for her husband, the man who had left his comfortable life of privilege to join her in the messy, necessary work of fighting systemic racism, who had taken a leave of absence from surgery to care for Grace during Victoria's difficult first trimester, who had proven that love wasn't just a feeling, but a series of choices made daily. As they exchanged new vows, promises forged in the fire of adversity and strengthened by shared purpose, Victoria thought about the girl she'd been in Detroit, dreaming of success but never imagining she'd find a love this pure. I promise, she said to Alexander, her hand on her growing belly, to never stop fighting for justice, but to always come home to your arms when the battle feels too heavy. I promise, Alexander replied, to use my privilege as a weapon against injustice, and my love as a sanctuary for your beautiful, fierce heart. The kiss that sealed their renewed vows was witnessed by 300 guests, but it felt as intimate as their first kiss in the hospital corridor, when they'd realized that trauma shared could become a triumph multiplied. Do you believe that our greatest challenges can lead us to our greatest blessings? Share your own stories of love emerging from difficult times in the comments below. As the reception moved into full swing, Victoria and Alexander slipped away to the penthouse balcony overlooking Michigan Avenue. The same city that had witnessed her humiliation now stretched before them like a promise, every light a reminder that darkness was temporary but justice was eternal. Any regrets? Alexander asked, pulling her close as Chicago's skyline glittered beneath them. Only one, Victoria smiled, her hand finding his. I regret that it took someone accusing me of theft to realize I'd been robbing myself of the possibility of love. Their laughter echoed across the rooftop, joined by the sound of celebration from below where their guests danced under stars that had witnessed their journey from strangers to soulmates. The Grandview Hotel would forever be marked as the place where Victoria James was wrongly accused, publicly humiliated, and racially profiled. But it would also be remembered as the place where Dr. Alexander Rhodes chose courage over comfort, where love was born from the ashes of injustice, and where two hearts found their home in each other. Some love stories begin with meet-cuties and fairy tale moments. Theirs began with the worst moment of her life and the defining moment of his character. But that foundation, built on truth, justice, and the revolutionary act of seeing each other's full humanity, proved unshakable. As they watched the city sleep beneath them, Victoria and Alexander Rhodes knew that their greatest victory wasn't the lawsuit they'd won, the policies they'd changed, or even the empire they'd built together. Their greatest victory was this: two people who had chosen to transform pain into purpose, injustice into love, and a moment of hate into a lifetime of healing. Not just for themselves, but for everyone whose story would be written differently because they had the courage to stand up and say, "This is wrong, and love is the answer." The same lobby where Victoria had once stood accused and alone now hosted their celebration of love, justice, and the unshakable truth that sometimes the most beautiful chapters of our lives begin with the words. What happened next shocked everyone. Thanks for sticking with this story till the very end. But trust me, you haven't seen anything yet. The next story is crazier, more shocking, and will blow your mind. Click the image on your screen now and dive right in. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss a single twist.